Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into the kind of night that makes your teeth chatter just by thinking about it. The kind of winter where even the moon looks cold and the wind sounds like it's gnawing on the trees. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop a comment with your location and local time. I love seeing where in the world you're listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stand at the edge of a medieval forest, somewhere in northern Europe, where snow muffles every sound except your own breath. The air is sharp enough to taste, dry enough to crack your lips, and the world is so white and still, it feels like you're walking through a painting made entirely of frost. In front of you, a hunter moves wrapped in layered wool and animal skins, face half hidden by a hood rimed with ice. He's trudging through knee-deep snow, carrying a bow, a small hatchet, and the kind of optimism that only hunger can fuel. You follow, every crunch of snow beneath your boots echoing like breaking glass in the stillness, wondering how anyone ever managed to sleep out here without freezing into a permanent snow sculpture. The hunter pauses beneath a blackened pine, sets down his pack, and begins the nightly ritual of survival. This is where frost meets firelight, where human stubbornness collides with nature's indifference, and where the simple act of sleeping becomes a minor miracle. You can almost hear his thoughts: find shelter, make fire, don't die. It's a pretty basic to-do list, but it's one that kept entire generations alive long before central heating and electric blankets existed. He kneels to scrape away the snow until he hits frozen soil, each strike of his gloved hand dull and heavy. You realize that this right here is the heart of medieval winter life, not grand castles or shining armor, but a single person fighting for warmth in a landscape that couldn't care less. There's a mainstream historical fact that medieval hunters, especially in northern Europe and Scandinavia, often traveled in small bands during winter hunts for wolves and elk, setting up temporary camps deep in the forest that could last for days. Chroniclers wrote about their cold vigils, nights spent guarding meat from scavengers or waiting for prey to wander near, sleeping in shifts so no one froze entirely or got eaten in their sleep. It sounds noble until you remember they were usually half-starved, underpaid, and trying not to light fires that would give away their location or worse, attract wolves. You crouch beside our imaginary hunter as he arranges a circle of stones and pulls out a piece of flint. He strikes it once, twice, and curses under his breath. Well, probably, though we'll keep it PG. Sparks sputter like tired fireflies and die. He tries again, muttering something that could be a prayer or a medieval insult. The wind steals the heat before it's born, until finally, a spark catches, kisses a shred of dry moss, and the faintest curl of smoke rises. You almost cheer, but you know better the moment you exhale too loudly that smoke might die out of spite. There's your quirky tidbit. According to a few surviving hunting manuals, some medieval woodsmen genuinely believed that fire had moods, that you could offend it by swearing, and that silence or polite flattery helped it burn. Imagine that, whispering compliments to a handful of twigs while your fingers go numb. And it worked often enough that they kept doing it. The hunter feeds the baby flame with slivers of pine bark, then sticks, then a thick log that hisses like an angry cat as moisture boils off. The light grows, orange and alive, painting his weathered face in flickers of gold. You can almost feel the heat on your own cheeks, even though you're just listening in your warm room, maybe sipping tea or scrolling on your phone. That's the power of this tiny fire. Somewhere between history and imagination, it still warms you. Around him the forest breathes. Snow falls in slow motion, flakes catching the light like drifting ash. The trees creak, heavy with ice, and far off an owl calls, the sound low and hollow, as if the woods themselves are whispering lullabies. You can see the hunter's shoulders drop a little as warmth begins to return. He stretches his hands toward the fire, palms pinking up from the heat, then pulls a strip of salted meat from his pouch and holds it near the flame. It sizzles faintly, and for a second he smiles because dinner, even a terrible one, is better than nothing. You think about how modern life has spoiled you. Thermostats, insulation, microwaves. He had smoke in his lungs, snow in his boots, and probably frostbite in places best left unmentioned. But he also had a kind of clarity. Survival was the only item on the menu. The scholarly debate comes in here. Historians still argue whether medieval hunters preferred sleeping close to their fire or burying it before sleeping to avoid detection or smoke inhalation. Some claim they smothered the coals, covered themselves in furs, and relied on the earth's retained warmth. Others insist they slept curled beside glowing embers, trusting their own exhaustion more than caution. No one agrees, which makes you wonder how many nights were spent testing both theories and regretting it. The hunter seems to settle for the sleep near fire and hope for the best approach. He shifts closer, poking the logs until sparks leap upward like fireflies seeking heaven. He wraps himself in a heavy cloak lined with fur so old it probably remembers another owner's name. He pulls his hood low, lays his bow within reach, and lowers himself slowly, joints creaking like the trees above. You can almost hear the sigh that escapes him, not relief exactly, but resignation. The kind of sound people make when they know the night will be long but not impossible. The fire hums and the forest exhales around him. Somewhere far away, wolves howl, their voices rising and falling like the tide. You imagine him listening, eyes closed, counting howls like sheep, trying to tell how far away they are. Closer than he'd like, maybe, but the flames crackle, and the warmth seeps into the edges of his world, dulling fear into fatigue. You picture the stars above, clear and cruel, watching as his breathing slows and the fire burns down to coals. You wonder what he dreams about, warm bread, perhaps, or summer rain, or maybe just not dying. You chuckle softly, the same way you do when you remember your own worst camping trip and how proud you felt for surviving it. Only, he doesn't get to go home to a hot shower. This is his home, at least for tonight. The wind picks up again, sighing through the pine needles like a ghost with good rhythm. He stirs, pulls his cloak tighter, and turns his back to the breeze. You sense that moment between wakefulness and sleep when the body surrenders but the mind lingers, still listening, still alert. That's the paradox of medieval winter nights. You rest, but you never really sleep. Even your dreams have to wear coats. The hunter's fire glows lower now, embers pulsing faintly under the ash. His breath fogs in slow, even clouds. You realize you've been holding your own breath, sharing his rhythm without meaning to. You exhale, smile, and settle a little deeper into your own comfort. In a world of central heating and electric light, it feels oddly soothing to remember that once, warmth was an earned privilege, not a switch on a wall. The forest fades behind your eyelids, and the last thing you see is that tiny circle of light, fragile, defiant, eternal, burning in the heart of winter's wild silence. You wake to a world that's both silent and alive, the snow still whispering down in flakes too soft to hear, but heavy enough to bend the pines into patient arches above you. The fire from last night is nothing more than a scatter of gray coals, faintly breathing smoke like a sleeping dragon that's lost interest in heroics. The hunter beside you stirs, stretches, and shakes the frost from his cloak. He moves with the slow stiffness of someone who's slept on frozen ground, which, to be fair, he has, and for a brief moment you envy his sheer endurance, though not his smell. You're surrounded by trees that rise like cathedral pillars, every branch drooping under snow's sacred weight, forming a dome of white silence. It feels holy in a way churches try to imitate but rarely achieve. Beneath these pine boughs, the world shrinks to what you can see, hear, and breathe. There's a kind of peace in it. The peace of necessity, because when you're freezing, you don't have the luxury of overthinking. The hunter's next task is to rebuild the shelter, a daily routine of frustration, precision, and hope. Last night's crude windbreak did its job, but the forest has shifted overnight. Branches have sagged lower, snow has piled higher, and one corner of his lean-to has caved like a failed promise. You watch as he clears a patch of ground again, scraping snow aside with a branch. Beneath the top layer of powder lies a crust of ice, glistening like glass. He cracks it with the blunt edge of his axe, exposing the earth beneath a patch of frozen brown, hard as stone but somehow reassuringly real. He begins to gather pine boughs, hacking them from nearby trees, arranging them in layers so thick you could mistake the structure for a hedgehog trying to impersonate a cottage. It's not pretty, but beauty doesn't keep you alive. The pine needles form a mat that traps air, acting like nature's insulation. Though if you've ever slept on pine branches yourself, you know they're the medieval equivalent of a lumpy mattress with a built-in stabbing feature. Still, it's better than the alternative, lying directly on snow, which sucks heat faster than a tax collector in Lent. The hunter's logic is simple. If the ground steals warmth, sleep above it. He props branches into a crude A-frame, layering more over the top until the structure looks almost intentional. A curtain of animal hide seals one side, the other stays open to the fire pit. He's built himself a one-night chapel of survival, and you can't help but admire the craftsmanship of desperation. There's your mainstream historical fact. Medieval hunters and foresters, particularly in regions like the Carpathians and the Alps, often constructed temporary pine shelters known as bow huts or lean-to lodges. Chroniclers and later ethnographers described them as triangular or domed shelters made of stacked branches, often waterproofed with moss or snow. They weren't meant for comfort, just to trap heat and block wind long enough to see another sunrise. It was a skill passed through generations, as vital as tracking or skinning. Some accounts even mention hunters competing over who could build the fastest, most efficient hut, though efficient here meant least likely to collapse before dawn. The hunter finishes his roof, steps back, and nods with grim satisfaction. It's not Versailles, but it'll do. He crouches, brushes the snow from a flat rock, and places a small carved figurine on it, a little wooden charm, no taller than your thumb, shaped like a bird or maybe a saint. A superstition, you realize, and here's your quirky tidbit. In several parts of medieval Europe, hunters carried sleep charms carved from yew or birch, often representing birds. The belief was that these charms kept the air moving, preventing bad spirits or sickness from settling in your sleep. Some even carved their initials or prayers into the wood before every hunt, like renewing an invisible insurance policy. You imagine our hunter whispering a quick prayer not to Saint Hubert, patron of hunters, but perhaps to his grandmother, who probably taught him which way to face the hut to avoid dream draughts. He sets the charm on the stone, straightens it, and because old habits die hard, bows his head for a second before getting back to work. You take in the scene, smoke rising lazily through the pines, light filtering down in silver shafts, snowflakes spinning in slow motion like dust motes in a frozen cathedral. For all the discomfort, it's breathtaking. You realize this isn't just survival, it's ritual. Every gesture, from scraping snow to positioning firewood, is a small act of worship to the god of endurance. But there's still a scholarly debate here. Did hunters really sleep under pine trees by choice or simply because it was all they had? Some historians argue the practice was deliberate. Pines shed snow easily, their boughs offer windbreaks, and the resin's scent might deter insects or even animals. Others claim it was just geographical luck, that pine forests happened to dominate northern hunting grounds, and the rest is romantic hindsight. Either way, the pine became part of the hunter's identity. Protector, shelter, fuel, and occasionally nemesis when a heavy branch dropped half a ton of snow onto your head at 3 a.m. The hunter crawls inside his shelter, testing its fit. From your angle, you can just see his face in the dim firelight, lined, tired, but oddly peaceful. He looks like someone who has made peace with the forest, or at least signed a temporary truce. You listen to the soft creak of wood, the muffled sigh of wind through needles, and realize how strange it is to find comfort in impermanence. The shelter will collapse in a day or two. The snow will erase every trace of his stay. Yet, for this one night, it's home. You can almost feel the warmth radiating from the small fire, smell the resin of burning pine, and hear the faint hiss of sap boiling in the flames. You imagine yourself lying there beside him, not as a participant but as an observer from centuries away, sharing that fragile peace. The hunter adjusts his cloak, mutters something that could be a joke, perhaps about his own craftsmanship, and stretches out on the pine bed. The needles creak, releasing their sharp scent, and for a moment it's as if the forest exhales with him. The cold presses in from all sides, testing, prodding, reminding him who's really in charge. But the fire holds, the shelter holds, and the night begins to soften around the edges. You start to drift with him, lulled by the rhythm of wind through boughs. Maybe this is what medieval sleep really felt like. Not rest, but reprieve. You smile faintly, thinking that no matter how advanced humanity becomes, some of us will always crave that feeling of being tucked under trees, safe only because we built our own safety. Beneath the pine boughs, warmth is an act of rebellion, and sleep is the reward. You wake again to a silence so dense it hums, the kind of quiet that presses against your ears until you start to wonder if you've gone deaf or if the world itself has simply decided to stop breathing for a moment. The hunter's shelter has half collapsed overnight under the weight of new snow, but he doesn't curse or panic. He just sits up, dusts the frost from his beard, and examines his options like a man performing mental math with frostbite. The forest around him is all white geometry, angles of branches, mounds of drift, and a faint gray dawn trying to pretend it's morning. You notice something strange. Instead of clearing the snow away to find bare ground again, he begins to dig into it. The logic seems backward at first. You'd think snow would be the enemy, but this is one of those paradoxes nature hides in plain sight. Beneath the outer crust, the snow's temperature steadies close to freezing, which means it's actually warmer than the air. And so, like an eccentric saint of discomfort, he begins to carve his bed out of ice. He moves with practiced rhythm, using his hands, axe, and even a wooden bowl to hollow out a narrow trench about the length of his body. Every scoop sends a flurry of sparkling dust into the air, catching the pale morning light like powdered stars. Once the hollow is deep enough, he lines the bottom with a layer of straw and dried moss scavenged from beneath fallen logs. You can almost smell the faint earthiness of it, the ghost of last summer's forest, pressed into service once again. Then he adds another layer of pine boughs, needles facing up, making a mattress that's both soft and defiant. It's the medieval version of a memory foam bed, except the memory it preserves is mostly of frostbite. The hunter's movements are efficient but deliberate. There's a reverence in them, as if he's performing an ancient rite rather than just trying not to freeze to death. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Accounts from Scandinavian and Slavic hunting cultures describe this exact method, creating snow hollows or cold nests for rest. They appear in 13th and 14th century hunting manuals and folklore, often romanticized as proof of man's harmony with nature. In truth, it was less harmony and more begrudging cooperation. But it worked. Snow, when packed and shaped properly, acts like a cocoon. It insulates, muffles sound, and keeps warmth trapped where it matters. The irony is that the same thing capable of killing you can, when handled correctly, save your life. The hunter knows this. You can tell by how calmly he works, how he pauses every so often to test the snow's firmness, tapping it like a baker checking dough. You watch him smooth the edges, then crawl inside, wriggling down into the narrow hollow until only his face peeks out. He pulls his cloak tight and mutters something under his breath. Maybe a curse at the cold, maybe a thank you to it. In the faint half-light, The snowbed glows faintly blue around him, as if he's lying in a cocoon of ice-lit air. It's oddly beautiful, like sleeping inside a frozen cathedral built just for one. You imagine the stillness, the soft pressure of snow against fur, the damp chill that smells faintly of pine sap and old earth. It's uncomfortable, yes, but strangely safe. There's a saying, though nobody agrees where it came from, that snowberries sound, not souls. You think that fits? The hunter closes his eyes, and for a moment you almost believe you can hear his thoughts blending into the quiet. Then, with no warning, the silence breaks. A crow's call, sharp and ragged, cuts through the air like a cracked bell. The hunter opens one eye, sighs, and tosses a small snowball toward the noise, which accomplishes nothing except proving he's still got humor left. You can't help but chuckle softly. Even out here, surrounded by snow and solitude, people remain people, complaining about morning noises since time immemorial. There's your quirky tidbit. Medieval chroniclers recorded that some hunters believed crows were the souls of unsuccessful huntsmen, cursed to wander the woods forever mocking the living. The superstition went deep enough that a few men refused to kill or scare crows, fearing retribution. Others, less sentimental, claimed the opposite, that killing one would bring good luck for the next hunt. The hunter you're watching seems firmly in the pragmatic camp, too tired to care, too cold to philosophize. He settles back into his icy cradle, content that his snowbed will keep him off the wind. You watch as tiny crystals melt on his eyelashes, only to refreeze again seconds later. His breath forms halos of mist that drift upward and vanish. Around him, the forest seems to shrink, the pines closing ranks like old sentinels guarding his rest. You notice how the snow muffles even the fire's crackle. It's as if the world has turned down its own volume to help him sleep. And yet there's movement in the stillness. A fox padding silently through the undergrowth, the faint thump of snow falling from a branch, the creak of a distant tree splitting under ice. Everything breathes in rhythm with him, and the more you listen, the more the boundary between human and wilderness dissolves. Here's the scholarly debate. Historians still argue whether such snowbeds were a last resort technique or a deliberate strategy. Some claim they were a mark of seasoned woodsmen, knowledge passed through generations, proof of mastery over the cold. Others insist they were a sign of desperation, the choice of those caught too far from camp, gambling that exhaustion would beat frost. The truth, as always, likely lies between. You can't live in winter's world without occasionally making friends with the snow. The hunter's eyelids flutter. He's nearly asleep. You imagine the sensation, body heat slowly carving a bubble of warmth into the frozen cocoon. Steam rising invisibly, breath mingling with the faint scent of pine. His heartbeat slows, steady and deep, syncing with the rhythm of the wind outside. You catch yourself breathing with him again, your chest rising and falling at the same tempo, the way one does when listening to rain or a lullaby. You realize that the medieval world wasn't all noise and battle. It had these quiet, strange moments of intimacy between human and landscape, the kind that don't make it into chronicles but kept people alive nonetheless. The snow above him begins to sparkle faintly as sunlight creeps through, casting prismatic glimmers like stained glass across the hollow. The hunter doesn't stir. His hand rests lightly on the hilt of his knife, not from fear but habit. You picture him dreaming, though you're not sure what about. Maybe he dreams of fire, or bread, or a bed that doesn't melt. Maybe he dreams of fire, or bread, or a bed that doesn't melt. Maybe he dreams of nothing at all, letting the cold erase his thoughts for a while, and you, comfortably warm in your modern world, find yourself oddly envious. There's something honest about sleeping in snow. No distractions, no deadlines, just breath and silence and survival. The forest stands guard. The snow whispers its secrets, and for one night more, a medieval hunter sleeps unbroken beneath the vast indifferent stars. When the hunter wakes again, the world is white fire, frost glittering so fiercely in the early light that the forest looks as if it's made of shattered glass. Every movement is an act of will. His limbs protest, his breath steams in the cold air, and the cloak around his shoulders crackles like thin parchment. You watch as he crawls out of his snow hollow, brushing off a layer of glittering powder, and begins his morning ritual, the sacred medieval art of rearranging discomfort. He bends, stretches, mutters something that sounds halfway between a prayer and a complaint, and then reaches for his most valuable possession, his furs. This is the armor of winter, the difference between man and statue, between waking and freezing mid-yawn. He unfolds layers of hides, wolf, deer, sheep, and something you can't quite identify but definitely smells like historically accurate wet dog. Each layer tells a story of survival. A wolf taken after a week-long track through deep snow. A stag felled with a single arrow. A sheepskin traded from a monastery's winter stores. There's a hierarchy here, a kind of medieval fashion show judged entirely by warmth. The coarse wool tunic goes on first, scratchy but reliable, then a leather jerkin stiffened with age and sweat. Over that comes the fur mantle, fastened with a bone clasp carved into a cross. It's heavy, cumbersome, and gloriously effective. You can practically feel the difference as he pulls it tighter, trapping heat like a secret. There's your mainstream historical fact. Surviving records from the 13th and 14th centuries, especially those of royal hunts and monastic expeditions, describe the intricate layering of winter clothing among hunters and foresters. Wool was the foundation, linen the underlayer, and fur the crown jewel. Squirrel, fox, hare, and even beaver pelts were common, while wealthier men might flaunt sable or marten. The point wasn't just warmth, it was status. The more exotic the fur, the more important the man, or the more desperate he was to look important before freezing to death. Even monks in colder regions quietly bent their vows of modesty when temperatures dropped, trading rough habits for discreet sheepskin linings. Meanwhile, peasants and lower hunters layered whatever they could find: old hides, patched blankets, or even moss stuffed between tunics. Comfort was a luxury. Insulation was survival. The hunter checks each seam, tugging at the edges, making sure no wind can sneak in. He pulls up the hood lined with wolf fur, the muzzle still faintly visible, and for a moment he looks half man, half beast, a reminder of how thin the line between civilization and wilderness truly is. You picture him trudging through the snow, a walking contradiction wrapped in death to preserve life. And because medieval humor was as practical as it was grim, here's your quirky tidbit. Some hunters believed that sleeping in certain furs could influence their dreams. Wolf fur supposedly granted courage, while hare fur brought swiftness and, oddly enough, romantic dreams involving whoever was nearest to your campfire. One German folktale even warned that sleeping on a bear hide too often would make you grumpy and solitary. Like a bear, the chronicler added helpfully, as if medieval readers needed clarification. Our hunter, judging by his choice, prefers the balance of wolf and deer, courage tempered by caution. You watch him crouch near his tiny fire and reheat last night's frozen stew, poking it with a stick until the ice crystals hiss away. He eats methodically, small bites, more out of duty than hunger. His breath mingles with the steam, creating tiny clouds that drift upward and vanish. You can't help but think how strange it must feel to taste something warm in a world so relentlessly cold. When he finishes, he leans back, wipes his mouth with the back of his glove, and grins faintly. That smile, the briefest flicker of comfort, is the entire reason for his struggle. You realize that every layer of fur, every stiff seam, is more than clothing. It's a story of persistence stitched together by necessity. The scholarly debate comes next, and it's a cozy one. Were medieval furs treated more for preservation or for vanity? Some historians argue that hunters and trappers rarely cared about beauty. They needed function. Their garments were rough, greasy, and smelled like the animals they came from. Others insist that even practical hunters took pride in presentation, that a well-kept pelt was a mark of professionalism, not vanity. Archaeological finds of fur-trimmed cuffs and embroidered seams on hunting gear suggest that even in the wilderness, a touch of style survived. Perhaps our hunter is both pragmatic enough to wear what works, human enough to care how it looks. You picture him testing his reflection in a frozen pond, adjusting his hood just slightly, not for vanity but because a hood slipping over your eyes mid-hunt could mean death. Still, you suspect he might also appreciate that the fur gives him an air of rugged nobility, like a knight of the cold. He rises, stamping his boots, flexing his fingers to restore circulation. The wind picks up again, curling through the trees with the smell of pine smoke and distant snow. He pulls his mantle tighter and begins to pace around the camp, checking his gear. Every movement rustles softly, a chorus of pelts whispering against each other. There's something hypnotic about it, the rhythm of fabric, the crunch of frost, the quiet determination in his breath. You start to realize that warmth for him isn't just physical, it's psychological. These layers of fur are armor, not just against the cold but against despair. They remind him he's human, not prey, that he belongs in this wilderness because he's adapted to it. You think of how modern people wrap themselves in blankets on a cold morning, chasing comfort while the heater hums. The principle's the same. The hunter's furs are his blanket, his identity and his sanity rolled into one. He crouches again by the fire, rubbing his hands. The flames dance against the gleam of the pelts, throwing gold into silver, orange into gray. You could swear he looks almost royal for a moment, his fur mantle glowing like something out of a legend. Maybe this is how myths begin. One exhausted man, one stubborn fire, and enough furs to look like he conquered the winter rather than survived it. The forest seems to agree. Even the wind has quieted, as if paying respect. The hunter exhales long and slow, watching his breath mingle with the smoke. You match his rhythm again, breathing with him. Somewhere between the layers of history and the flicker of firelight, you realize that every generation has its own version of warmth, its own stubborn refusal to surrender. The medieval hunter just wrapped his in fur and faith. You wrap yours in memory and imagination, and for a moment, across centuries of snow, both kinds of warmth feel exactly the same. The fire has shrunk to embers again, a soft orange pulse beneath a thin crust of ash, and beside it the hunter stirs, not because of the cold this time, but because of movement pressed close against his ribs. You see it, a slow stretch, a sigh, the faint thump of a tail against snow. The hunter's eyes open, and there she is, a dog, thick-coated, pale as frost, curled tightly against him like a small breathing furnace. Her fur glows in the firelight, every strand haloed by warmth, and for a moment you understand that medieval survival wasn't just about skill, it was about companionship. The hunter scratches behind her ears, muttering in a voice that's rough but kind. The dog shifts, presses her nose against his chest, and both man and beast exhale the same cloud of fog, two living beings sharing one rhythm in a world that doesn't care if they breathe or freeze. You realize this is what passes for luxury in the winter wilds, a heartbeat that isn't your own. He reaches for a piece of dried meat from his pouch, holds it between his fingers, and waits until the dog takes it gently. No commands, no tricks, no fuss, just trust forged by hunger and necessity. You can almost feel the rough pads of her paws as she rests them on his leg, the weight of her loyalty heavier than any cloak. There's your mainstream historical fact. Throughout the Middle Ages, hunting dogs were more than tools. They were partners, protectors, and sometimes the only source of warmth. Nobles had kennels of greyhounds and mastiffs, while common hunters relied on sturdy mutts bred for endurance rather than elegance. Chroniclers like Gaston Phoebus in his Livre de Chasse described hunters sleeping in the company of hounds, for the dog's warmth is better than fire. Archaeologists even found evidence of dogs buried beside their masters in northern Europe, suggesting bonds that went far beyond utility. And out here, in a world of ice and silence, that bond is not sentiment, it's strategy. You imagine the nights when firewood ran out, when the wind stole every spark, and the hunter had nothing but fur and faith to keep him alive. That's when the dog becomes not just a friend, but a shield against the void. The hunter rises slowly, and the dog follows, shaking snow from her coat in a glittering shower that sparkles like a burst of stars. She trots a few steps away, sniffs the air, ears twitching with the kind of awareness that never sleeps. The hunter watches her the way one watches an oracle, reading meaning in every small movement. In this world, the dog's senses are worth more than any map or compass. She circles the camp once, satisfied that the night has left no intruders, and returns to sit by his side. He pats her flank and murmurs something that sounds like "good girl" in a language long buried by time. It's a phrase older than books, older than written comfort. You find yourself smiling, maybe because you've seen that same expression before. The quiet pride of anyone who's ever owned a dog. The centuries fall away, and suddenly it doesn't matter whether the fire's electric or made from pine bark. Companionship hasn't evolved. It's eternal. But medieval hunters took it to practical extremes. Here's your quirky tidbit. According to one 14th century account from the Baltic region, some hunters trained their dogs not only to track or guard but to sleep on command. When the night grew dangerously cold, they'd whisper a word something like "nestle," and the dogs would pile around them in a living blanket, snouts tucked under arms, tails wrapped over faces. The larger the pack, the better the insulation. It wasn't affection, it was logistics. But you can bet affection crept in anyway. Imagine trying to act stoic while a 40-kilo hound insists on sleeping across your chest like a hairy anvil. The hunter probably complained, but only out loud. Inside, he was grateful beyond measure. You watch as our hunter and his companion prepare for the day. He rubs snow on his face to wake up a medieval substitute for coffee, and she barks once, sharp and bright, as if scolding him for being slow. He grins, the first true smile you've seen from him, and for a second he looks younger. Together, they move through the camp in silent rhythm. He kicks snow over the dying embers. She trots ahead, nose low, tail high. When he shoulders his pack, she's already 10 paces ahead, tracing invisible paths through the snow. The forest opens before them, endless and indifferent. You follow, stepping into their tracks, and notice how the hunter never calls to her. He doesn't need to. They've moved as one for years. She knows where he'll go before he decides it. That's what trust looks like when words freeze in the air. Here comes the scholarly debate, and it's an oddly tender one. Were medieval hunters truly affectionate toward their dogs, or were they purely practical? Some historians, citing poetry and chronicles, claim these men treated dogs as equals in hardship, even feeding them from the same bowl. Others, pointing to hunting manuals and estate records, argue the relationship was utilitarian, marked by training and discipline rather than love. Yet the evidence, burials, paintings, personal letters, leans toward genuine attachment. You can't share a winter like this with a creature and not blur the line between necessity and friendship. Survival breeds affection. Whether you admit it or not, the hunter and his dog stop at a clearing. The snow here is deeper, untouched, and sunlight filters through the pines like liquid gold. Steam rises faintly from their bodies as they breathe. He kneels, scoops snow into his hands, and rubs it over the dog's fur, clearing away ice clumps that have formed overnight. She leans into his touch, eyes half closed, and for a brief second the whole forest feels warmer. The sound of his rough voice, the soft chuff of her breath, the steady beat of two hearts in sync, these things dissolve the cold in a way fire never could. You realize, Maybe for the first time, that warmth isn't a physical state, it's relational. It's found in nearness, in loyalty, in shared silence that means you're not alone. The hunter eats a few mouthfuls of bread, tosses a crumb to the dog, and wipes his beard with the back of his hand. He looks around the clearing, then picks up a small branch and begins sketching in the snow. Perhaps a map, perhaps nothing. The dog lies beside him, head on paws, watching the lines form with half-lidded eyes. You find yourself wondering how many nights just like this played out across centuries. Anonymous men, anonymous dogs, leaving nothing behind but melted snow and faint footprints. History rarely remembers such moments. It loves kings and wars, not companionship beside dying fires. Yet here, in this tiny forgotten clearing, you feel history breathing through fur and frost. The hunter rises again, his dog bounding ahead through drifts that nearly swallow her. She leaps and lands, a flash of life in the white expanse. He laughs, not loudly, but enough that you catch it, a low rumble of sound that warms the air around him. You think about how laughter, like fire, is fragile in the cold. It needs tending, it flickers easily, but when it survives, it's more precious than gold. He whistles softly. She returns, shaking snow all over him. He pretends to scold her, but the grin stays. They move on, shadows stretching long and thin across the snow. The man's heavy and measured, the dog's light and dancing. Together they vanish deeper into the pines, two figures bound by breath and instinct. And, as they fade from view, you realize something important. Even in the bleakest winter, no one truly survives alone. The hunter's furs may keep out the wind, but it's the warmth of another living creature, one heartbeat pressed against another, that keeps the soul from freezing. You breathe in, exhale slowly, and imagine the sound of paws crunching in the distance. That rhythm, steady and unbroken, is what kept humanity alive long before fire was ever tamed. The snow has thickened again, fine as ash, sifting down in a patient silence that turns the forest into an hourglass of white. You stand beside the hunter as he trudges into the clearing where the morning wind gnaws at every exposed patch of skin, and you realize that fire, out here, isn't just comfort, it's theology. He kneels beside the blackened stones of last night's camp and brushes away the snow, uncovering faint traces of warmth, thin curls of smoke like ghosts that refuse to leave. His dog waits, tail sweeping slow arcs in the powder, watching with solemn curiosity. You watch too, and it dawns on you that the medieval hunter's most important skill wasn't tracking or shooting, it was convincing the elements to cooperate. He pulls a leather pouch from his belt, its contents precious beyond gold, a bit of flint, a shard of steel, and a wisp of dry tinder wrapped in cloth. The pouch looks old enough to have seen crusades, its leather stiff and cracked from years of cold. He works with reverence, almost as if performing a sacrament. There's your mainstream historical fact. Medieval fire starting was a craft passed through generations, often practiced by hunters, shepherds, and soldiers who couldn't afford to fail. The standard method, striking flint against high-carbon steel to shower sparks onto tinder, was an art form. The tinder could be char cloth, fungus from birch trees, or even dried moss mixed with powdered sulfur if they could find it. Archaeological digs across Europe have found these kits buried with their owners, suggesting that for many, being without one was as unthinkable as being without a weapon. Fire wasn't merely heat, it was continuity, proof that the world still followed its ancient rules. Without it, the line between life and death blurred faster than a breath in cold air. The hunter arranges his tools carefully, whispering something under his breath, maybe a prayer, maybe just muscle memory disguised as faith. His hands are clumsy with cold, and he strikes once, twice until sparks leap out like tiny stars. The first few die instantly, swallowed by damp air. He adjusts his grip, tries again. A spark lands, winks out, then another catches, glowing faintly in the bundle of tinder. He bends close, breathes life into it with slow, measured exhales, and for a moment you feel yourself holding your breath with him. The ember brightens, eats its way through the fibers, and then there it is, a flame, small but alive, a heartbeat of color in a world made of frost. He smiles faintly. Not joy, exactly, but recognition, an old agreement renewed. Here's your quirky tidbit. In parts of medieval Scandinavia, there was a superstition that fire had a temperament. Hunters would greet it aloud the first time it caught, offering a word of thanks or even a morsel of bread. Failing to do so, it was said, made the flame sulk, sputter, or turn dangerous. Some even claimed that insulting fire could cause it to wander. Yes, wander, abandoning its owner to the cold. It sounds ridiculous until you remember that when every spark is survival, it's natural to imagine it has a will of its own. The hunter seems to subscribe to this quiet faith. He nods once as if thanking the flame for returning. He feeds it twigs first, then slivers of bark, then thicker branches. The fire grows, its light carving a golden dome beneath the trees. The dog settles near him, close enough to warm her paws, far enough to avoid the sparks. The hunter stretches his hands toward the flames, palms blistered and red, and exhales slowly. The steam from his breath mingles with the smoke, twisting upward in ghostly threads. He sits there for a long time, staring into the fire like it's speaking a language only he understands. You can almost hear it too, the hiss of moisture burning away, the crackle of sap bursting, the sigh of pine resin as it releases the scent of forgotten summers. There's a scholarly debate here, and it burns hotter than you'd think. Did medieval people really see fire as sacred, or have modern historians romanticized it? Some argue that fire was purely utilitarian, stripped of mysticism except in formal religion. Others point to the abundance of folk prayers, charms, and proverbs about fire as proof that it carried spiritual weight far beyond its practical use. After all, monasteries had rituals for keeping the eternal flame alive, and many villages treated hearth fires as communal guardians, lit from the church candle during Easter, shared house to house. So when this lone hunter tends his little blaze, he's not just making heat, he's renewing a covenant older than any kingdom. The flames grow taller, licking the air with gold and blue tongues. He reaches for a piece of half-frozen meat, skewers it on a stick, and holds it over the fire. You watch the fat melt, dripping and sizzling into the coals, releasing an aroma that's half salvation, half torture. The dog lifts her head, nostrils flaring, tail wagging hopefully. The hunter chuckles, breaks the meat in half, and tosses her a piece. She catches it mid-air, graceful even in hunger, and settles back down, eyes gleaming. They eat in silence, except for the crackle of the fire, and it strikes you how few sounds there are in a medieval night. Every creak, every hiss, every snap of burning wood becomes its own symphony. There are no distant engines, no phones buzzing, just the steady communion between man, flame, and dog. When the meal is done, he leans closer to the fire again, this time cupping his hands as if drawing warmth directly into his bones. The snow outside the ring of light looks even darker now, the forest a sea of shadow and white. You realize how fragile this circle of fire truly is. A single gust, a single mistake, and it could vanish, yet it holds, steady and patient. You think about how much faith it takes to believe in something that delicate, and how similar that is to every small hope humans have ever clung to, that the light will last, that the warmth will return, that the cold won't win tonight. The hunter adjusts a log, watches sparks fly upward like a swarm of tiny souls escaping to heaven. He murmurs again, softer this time, perhaps naming people long gone, or thanking the forest for mercy. His dog shifts, resting her head on his knee. You notice how both their shadows flicker on the snow, merging and parting with the fire's pulse. For a brief impossible second, it looks like they're one creature, some mythic being of fur, smoke and endurance. And that's when it hits you. The miracle isn't the fire. It's the persistence behind it. Every spark, every strike, every breath he gave to coax it alive is a declaration that he refuses to vanish quietly. The medieval world was built on such stubbornness, on faith not in gods or kings but in the simple act of trying again. The hunter leans back, face lit by orange light, eyes half closed. His hands rest on his lap, scarred and trembling, and he looks utterly beautifully mortal. You feel warmth on your own skin now, not from the fire but from the story itself, radiating across centuries. The night deepens, but the flame doesn't fade. It hums quietly, its light wrapping the hunter and his dog in a trembling halo. The snow falls slower, gentler, as if the sky itself respects the effort it took to earn this warmth. You watch until even the shadows stop moving, and somewhere deep inside, you understand why they called it faith by fire alone. By the time the next night falls, the forest smells faintly of pine smoke, wet fur, and something vaguely edible simmering in a dented pot above the fire. You crouch beside the hunter as he stirs it, face half lit by the flame, steam curling upward like ghosts leaving the pot. The snow around the camp has turned to slush from the heat, a rare oasis in an otherwise unbroken world of white. The dog lies close by, chin on paws, tail twitching every time a whiff of meat rises. The hunter's expression is one of grim optimism, the look of a man who's eaten worse and survived it. He pokes the stew again, tastes it, makes a face that says, "Still terrible," and mutters something to the dog that probably translates to, "You're lucky you don't have a palate." You almost laugh, though your breath catches in the icy air. Because really, what could stew taste like after days of travel and frostbite? The broth is a grayish mystery of boiled snow water, salted rabbit, and whatever herbs he found that weren't frozen solid. And yet, as the pot bubbles faintly, there's comfort in it, a small reminder that civilization begins wherever something simmers. There's your mainstream historical fact. In the Middle Ages, stew was the ultimate survival meal, a dish so essential it was practically a lifestyle. Hunters, travelers, and even soldiers relied on it because it could turn scraps into sustenance. Chroniclers described pottage, a catch-all stew made from anything available, roots, grains, dried peas, or the odd unlucky animal. It simmered endlessly, each new addition stretching it into the next day. In some households, a pot might not be fully emptied for weeks, just refreshed with more water and ingredients. It was culinary reincarnation, one meal dying so the next could live. In the forest, that rule still applied, though with fewer spices and more prayers. You watch as the hunter adjusts the pot on its stick tripod, leaning in to sniff it again. Steam fogs his beard, and he exhales like a dragon resigned to his fate. The dog sits up, tail thumping, and he sighs. "All right then," he mutters, as if losing an argument, and ladles a small portion into a wooden bowl. He sets it down for her, and she laps it up eagerly, leaving behind a faint trail of steam on her whiskers. He watches her eat, half amused, half envious, then takes his own portion, balancing it on his knees. The first spoonful makes him wince. The second earns a grunt of approval. You realize that taste is relative when you're freezing. The difference between awful and delicious is measured entirely in warmth. He eats slowly, staring into the flames, and the crackle of the fire blends with the gentle bubbling of the stew. You can almost hear the rhythm of it, a medieval lullaby in liquid form. The smell is earthy, rich, and faintly smoky, like boiled persistence. You imagine what it must have been like to hunt for every ingredient, to build a meal from hope and habit. Each bite, each chew is an act of gratitude disguised as exhaustion. The dog finishes first, licks the bowl clean, and lies back down, curling up with a satisfied sigh that says, "We've earned this." The hunter glances at her, smirks, and nods as if to say, "Yeah, we did. Here's your quirky tidbit." In certain Germanic and Scandinavian hunting circles, there was a superstition that food cooked over unlucky wood, like birch struck by lightning or ash from a funeral pyre, would curse the eater with nightmares. To test the wood's luck, hunters would drop a small stick into the fire and watch the smoke. If it rose straight, the night would be calm. If it twisted, expect spirits or indigestion. Some even whispered that owls watching from the trees were drawn not to prey, but to bad cooking. You can picture it, a medieval hunter glaring suspiciously at a bird, muttering, "Don't you judge me, feathered critic." Our hunter seems aware of these old fears. He keeps glancing up into the dark pines as he eats, half expecting an audience. But the forest remains quiet, only the occasional crack of frost breaking the stillness. Once the meal is done, he pours snow into the pot to wash it out, shaking it in circles until the water turns gray and cold. He sets it aside to freeze overnight, because why waste effort drying something when nature does it for free? Then he leans back against a log, sighing through his teeth, full in the way only the barely fed can be. The dog shifts, resting her head on his thigh, eyes half closed. The hunter scratches behind her ears absently, his mind wandering somewhere far from this frozen cathedral. You follow his gaze upward to the sky. Clear now, stars scattered like spilled salt, the moon swollen and pale. The firelight dances on his face, and you can almost read his thoughts, memories of tavern meals, the sound of laughter, the smell of bread. But even as nostalgia flickers, there's pride here too. He doesn't envy comfort. He honors effort. Out here, every full stomach is a small victory. The scholarly debate stirs now like the stew itself. How well fed were medieval hunters really? Some argue they ate lavishly compared to peasants, their diet rich in game, fat, and protein. Others point out that winter hunts often failed, that many returned with little more than frozen fingers and tall tails. Records from monastic kitchens mention dried venison and salted fish, suggesting that preservation, not abundance, defined medieval winter cuisine. In the field, a hunter's meal depended entirely on luck and skill, and luck, as we've seen, is a fickle dinner guest. You can imagine the nights when he ate nothing at all, curling beside a dying fire with hunger gnawing louder than wolves. Tonight, though, he's fed, and that makes him king of this snowy kingdom. The fire crackles lower now, reduced to glowing coals. The hunter adjusts his furs, wrapping them tighter around his shoulders. His eyelids grow heavy, and you sense the slow drift of sleep creeping closer. The dog's breathing deepens beside him. The forest watches in silence. Its only movement, the lazy fall of snowflakes that vanish before touching the embers. You find yourself drifting too, lulled by the imagined warmth, by the thought of that awful, wonderful stew bubbling softly into memory. The hunter tilts his head back, staring up at the sky, and murmurs something faintly audible, perhaps a prayer, perhaps a recipe. It's impossible to tell the difference in this light. Before his eyes close, he pokes the fire once more, sending a spark spiraling upward. It vanishes into the darkness, swallowed by stars, and you realize it's a perfect metaphor for this life, small warmths defying endless cold. You breathe in, smell the phantom stew, and exhale into the quiet. The forest exhales too, in sympathy, and somewhere, deep beneath the pines, a frozen river hums faintly like a heartbeat. You think of every meal you've ever rushed through, every moment you've taken comfort for granted, and you promise yourself to savor the next one. Because in the end, even in the middle of nowhere, a pot of questionable rabbit stew at midnight can taste exactly like survival, and sometimes that's the finest flavor there is. The night deepens until it's almost a physical thing, a velvet darkness you could reach out and touch. The hunter lies half awake, one hand resting on his dog's flank, the other near the dying fire. The last embers glow like buried rubies, faint but alive, and the forest breathes around him in long, slow sighs. You can hear it, too, the faint rustle of frost-laden branches, the whisper of drifting snow, the steady rhythm of wind weaving through the pines. Every sound has weight out here, every silence its own personality. Then somewhere above the black canopy comes a soft hoot, long, low, deliberate. The hunter's eyes open, not in alarm, but in recognition. The dog lifts her head, ears twitching. A snow owl calls again, closer this time, its voice echoing through the cold like a flute carved from moonlight. It's both eerie and comforting, the kind of sound that belongs equally to nightmares and lullabies. The hunter exhales, slow and steady, then murmurs something under his breath that might be a prayer, or might just be gratitude that something else is awake. You tilt your head with him, scanning the branches, and spot it. The owl, perched motionless on a high pine limb, its feathers gleaming white against the blue-gray dark. Its eyes are molten amber, and for a second they catch the firelight, glowing like twin candles. The forest feels smaller under that gaze, watched, judged, maybe even blessed. The hunter nods slightly, acknowledging the creature like an old acquaintance. There's no fear here, only mutual respect. They are both hunters, after all. Creatures of silence, patience, and cold endurance. There's your mainstream historical fact. In medieval Europe, the owl carried dual symbolism, wisdom and doom, blessing and curse. Monks painted it in margins of illuminated manuscripts as a symbol of solitude and contemplation, but peasants whispered that hearing one at night foretold death. Hunters, though, took a middle path. Many believed owls guarded the forest's balance, warning of predators or spirits. Some even claimed that sleeping under an owl's call brought good luck, because it meant the night was too still for wolves. Others swore the opposite, that the owl's voice was a ghostly tolling, summoning the lost. You imagine how each hoot might have carried a different meaning depending on the heart that heard it. Tonight, for our hunter, it sounds like reassurance. Something alive is singing, and he's not alone in the endless snow. He rolls onto his back, watching the sky through gaps in the branches. The stars burn faintly behind thin veils of cloud, and the moon has grown pale and heavy. The dog sighs beside him, curling tighter, her nose buried in her tail. The fire cracks one last time before settling into quiet coals. The owl hoots again, then glides silently from its perch, wings wide and slow, floating over the clearing like a dream given feathers. You almost don't believe something so large can move without sound. Its shadow passes across the hunter's face, and for a moment he looks serene, almost holy in the dim light. Here's your quirky tidbit. According to a few obscure 13th century field notes from northern France, some foresters swore that owls could steal warmth if you looked at them too long. Their reasoning: the human soul, drawn to the owl's unblinking gaze, would forget to tend the fire. It's not scientifically sound, but it's poetic and very on brand for a time when people blamed animals for philosophical problems. Hunters countered this superstition by tossing a pinch of ash toward the bird, symbolically giving back what it had taken. You can almost see our hunter doing it too, flicking a bit of soot into the air, muttering a half-joking apology to balance the scales. He knows better, of course, but rituals are less about belief and more about continuity. Out here, in the silent kingdom of frost, repetition keeps your sanity intact. The forest hums again. Branches creak. Distant snow collapses from a bough with a muffled thud. And then all is still. You start to realize how layered this quiet really is. Beneath it lies the faint movement of mice under snow, the steady drip of thawing frost, even the ghostly whistle of wind threading through hollow logs. Every sound becomes a heartbeat in the night's body. The hunter listens, eyes half closed as if counting them one by one. His breathing slows, deepens, and blends with the rhythm of the forest until you can't tell where man ends and landscape begins. The scholarly debate comes in softly. Like the owl itself, was medieval night truly this silent, or have modern imaginations romanticized it? Some historians argue that the pre-industrial world was far louder than we think, filled with animal cries, creaking timber, and the groans of shifting ice. Others maintain that isolation amplified perception, making each faint noise monumental. Either way, the hunter's night is not silent because nothing happens, it's silent because he has learned to listen differently. He doesn't fear the sounds, he measures them. The owl's hoot, the snapping twig, the sigh of snow, all are signs in a language he can read. You realize this is what survival really means, not conquering nature, but learning to speak her dialect. The fire fades to embers, and the moon slides lower, brushing the treetops. The owl returns, landing on a nearer branch this time, its head tilting with that uncanny avian precision. The hunter smiles faintly, amused. "You again," he whispers, though no one answers. The dog lifts her head once, grumbles softly, then settles back down. The owl blinks, swivels its head nearly all the way around, then gives a soft, short hoot, different this time, almost conversational. The hunter chuckles under his breath, shaking his head as if to say, "Fine, keep watch then." The creature remains still, eyes glowing, sentinel of the night. You feel its presence too, vast and ancient, older than any kingdom or church. In this frozen wilderness, it's the closest thing to prayer. The hunter's eyelids grow heavy again. His thoughts drift between dreams and awareness, the line blurred by fatigue and cold. He hears the owl one last time, its call fading into distance, and then his body finally surrenders to sleep. The dog shifts closer, pressing against his chest. The last embers pulse softly like a heartbeat under snow. You listen as everything slows, the breathing, the wind, even your own imagination. The night exhales, and for a long moment, the entire forest seems to hold its breath with him. If you listen closely, you can almost hear it, too. The lullaby of the snow owl, equal parts comfort and warning, echoing across the centuries. It isn't a song about safety, it's a song about acceptance, about learning to rest in a world that will never grow warm just because you wish it to. And as the hunter sleeps beneath that sound, wrapped in fur and faith, you realize you've been listening not to danger, but to endurance. The oldest melody humankind ever knew. Somewhere between exhaustion and frost, the hunter drifts into sleep so deep it might as well be hibernation. His breath slows, soft clouds of vapor rising and vanishing against the frozen air, and his hand, still gloved, rests on the hilt of his knife like a reflex older than memory. The dog snores lightly, a small rhythm in the night's vast quiet, and above them snow continues its endless descent, each flake a tiny confession of winter's persistence. Inside the hunter's head, the line between memory and dream begins to blur. You can almost see it forming, the familiar forest, reshaped by imagination, glowing faintly blue under moonlight. He stands again, only this time he's lighter, faster, his steps silent even on ice. He's no longer cold, he's something else, something primal, the embodiment of hunger and purpose. You follow him through this dreamscape, noticing that even the trees seem alive here, bending as he passes, their branches whispering in voices too old for words. He's hunting again, though he doesn't know what. His bow feels weightless, his breath steady, his eyes sharp. Ahead, shadows move, a deer perhaps, or something stranger, something that shifts shape whenever he looks too long. His dog is gone in this dream, replaced by silence that breathes just behind him. He draws his bow anyway, because even in his dreams instinct wins over reason. The arrow flies in slow motion, slicing through silver air, and when it lands, the sound it makes isn't a thud, it's a chime like metal striking stone. He walks toward it, but the forest has changed again. The snow is deeper now, almost liquid, swallowing his boots, then his knees, then his waist. He moves slower, heavier, but the pull of the unseen prey keeps him going. There's your mainstream historical fact. Chroniclers from the 12th and 13th centuries occasionally mentioned hunters' dreams, visions said to strike those who spent too long in the wilderness. One Benedictine monk wrote of men who walk in sleep, chasing invisible beasts through the snow, whispering the names of saints and animals together. Another called it the madness of the moon, claiming that hunters who spent too many nights awake under its light began to dream while still conscious. It's easy to imagine why hunger, cold, and endless solitude blend into something hallucinatory. Modern historians suspect these were early descriptions of sleep deprivation, but to those who lived it, it felt like crossing into another realm. The hunter stumbles deeper into his dream, and suddenly the forest brightens. Daylight floods the trees, golden and gentle. He's back at his village, only it's quiet, too quiet. The thatched roofs glisten with frost. The doors hang open, and no smoke curls from chimneys. He calls out, but his voice falls flat, as if the air refuses to carry it. He hears movement behind him, turns, and finds not his neighbors but a herd of deer standing in a perfect line, watching him. Their eyes are black and endless, and in their gaze he feels recognition. One steps forward. It's enormous, almost human in bearing, and lowers its head. The hunter's first instinct is to draw his bow, but he doesn't. He simply stands there, trembling. Then, without warning, the deer speaks. Its voice is low and resonant, not in words but in feeling, and what it says is something like, "You take what you need, but you never stop needing." He wakes instantly, heart pounding, covered in frost that glitters like guilt. The dog lifts her head, confused, and whines softly. He strokes her fur, whispering nonsense to calm them both. His breath is ragged, his pulse too loud. You can almost feel his confusion, the way the dream lingers like smoke after a fire. There's the scholarly debate. Were these dreams mere exhaustion, or did medieval hunters interpret them as spiritual experiences? Some historians argue that hunting was considered a sacred act, a balance between sustenance and sin, and dreams of animals speaking or fighting back were viewed as divine warnings. Others dismiss that, suggesting that such tales were simply campfire embellishments meant to keep apprentices cautious. But in moments like this, you see how little difference that makes. When you live so close to death, everything feels holy. He sits up slowly, shaking snow from his shoulders, and stares into the dim horizon. The sky is paling now, gray bleeding into the edges of dawn. He can still feel the deer's gaze somewhere behind his eyes, its words echoing faintly, not in language but in weight. He reaches for his water skin, finds it frozen solid, and laughs quietly, the sound small and human. The dog nudges him with her nose, and he smiles, the dream dissolving into something gentler. He remembers, faintly, a superstition his grandfather told him, that dreams in the forest weren't dreams at all, but conversations with the land. If you woke remembering them, it meant the land still recognized you as one of its own. Here's your quirky tidbit. A few surviving medieval charms against bad forest dreams involved sleeping with a twig of juniper beneath your tongue. It was believed the tree's spirit warded off deceitful visions. The practice persisted in some mountain villages into the 17th century, though modern scholars suspect the only real effect was waking up with an awful taste in your mouth. You imagine the hunter considering it, grimacing at the thought, and deciding that a few strange dreams were preferable to chewing bark at bedtime. The fire beside him flickers weakly, smoke curling like thoughts that refuse to leave. He feeds it a few twigs, careful not to wake his companion. As warmth seeps back into his hands, he finds himself smiling again, this time for real. The forest feels lighter somehow, less like a threat, and more like an old friend testing his patience. Maybe that's what the dream was, a reminder that even predators must bow to the rhythm of nature. You think about how modern life has separated us from that rhythm, how our dreams rarely smell like pine smoke or echo with animal voices. Out here, though, dreams and reality braid together like threads in the same rope. The first birds begin to call, faint and uncertain. The dog stretches, yawns, and licks a bit of frost from his cheek. He ruffles her ears, whispering, "We're still here," as though surprised by it. You realize that's the quiet miracle of every morning in this world, waking up at all. The fire crackles, the forest stirs, and the hunter stands, brushing snow from his cloak. He looks at the sky one last time, searching for meaning in the faint traces of stars, and for a moment you imagine he finds it. Maybe the dream was prophecy. Maybe it was just hunger. Maybe it doesn't matter. He shoulders his pack, calls softly to the dog, and together they step out of the hollow into the pale blue dawn. The forest opens before them, familiar yet transformed, its silence no longer threatening but tender. Behind them, the fire burns itself to ash, the smoke drifting upward in lazy spirals as if carrying the last fragments of his dream to wherever such things go. You breathe in with him, exhale into the cold, and feel that same quiet gratitude for endurance, for waking, for the strange mercy of another day in a world that asks only that you keep walking. When dawn fades back into dusk, the forest shifts again, as if inhaling for another long, cold breath. The hunter moves silently now, each step pressing into snow that glows silver beneath the rising moon. The light is strange, bright enough to see your breath shimmer, yet dim enough to blur edges, turning trees into ghosts and paths into memory. His dog pads ahead, tail low, nose buried in the powder, following scents that no human could decipher. The fire from earlier is a faint ember behind them, left to die quietly. Tonight is for movement, not warmth. The snow crunches under his boots in the rhythm of purpose, and you find yourself walking with him in spirit, careful not to disturb the fragile quiet. He pauses often, kneeling to study the snow. The moonlight catches on the fur lining his hood, turning it to a pale halo. To you, every track looks the same, just faint indentations leading nowhere, but to him, the forest is a diary written in footprints. There's your mainstream historical fact. Medieval hunters relied heavily on nocturnal tracking during winter, especially under full moons. Chronicles from regions like Livonia and Bohemia mention moon hunts, where men pursued wolves or boar by light reflected off snow. It was risky, frozen rivers, unseen cliffs, ambushes, but the moon's brightness and the contrast of tracks against white ground made it the only time they could move silently and see far. Some hunts were royal spectacles, others desperate survival missions. Our hunter's version is the latter. No trumpets, no hounds in formation, just one man and one loyal dog, reading shadows as if they were scripture. He crouches by a trail of prints, two parallel lines leading away from a copse of trees. The dog sniffs, tail wagging once, then stills. The hunter touches the snow with his gloved hand, feeling for texture, temperature. The edges are crisp, meaning recent. He glances up, scanning the tree line, and the world seems to pause with him. You can hear his breath, slow and deliberate, then faintly a sound so distant it could be imagination. The soft thump of hooves, the whisper of snow disturbed. He stands, gestures to the dog, and they move. Their pace is a blend of caution and hunger, the ancient dance of predator and prey. The forest here feels alive in ways daylight never shows. The moonlight doesn't illuminate, it reveals. Every tree trunk gleams like polished bone. Every branch wears a sleeve of frost. The air smells clean, metallic, faintly sweet from sap sealed in ice. Somewhere far away, a stream gurgles weakly under its frozen skin. The hunter steps carefully, knowing the sound of breaking ice can carry for miles. His dog trots beside him, her breath forming soft halos. Every so often she stops, sniffs, then looks back for approval. He nods and they continue. Here's your quirky tidbit. Medieval hunters swore that wolves could read the moon. The superstition claimed that during certain lunar phases, wolves would avoid open ground entirely, moving only in the moon's shadow. Experienced trackers therefore tried to think like wolves, positioning themselves between shadow and shine, believing they could outwit the beasts by mirroring their habits. Whether it worked or not, it gave their lonely pursuit a sense of strategy, even poetry. You imagine our hunter half smiling at that thought, trying to think like the prey, or perhaps like the moon itself, detached and watchful. The forest grows denser. Snow falls in light veils, catching the silver light until everything looks half real. You start to wonder if he's still awake, or if the night itself has pulled him into another of those half-dream states. He stops suddenly, raising a hand. Ahead, the tracks split. One large, one small. A doe and a fawn, maybe. He kneels again, brushing snow aside, finding faint drops of frozen blood. His expression doesn't change, but you sense the calculation behind his eyes. An injured animal means easier prey, but also possible competition. Wolves, other hunters, or worse, the thin ice of bad luck. He moves forward anyway. Survival has no poetry at close range. The scholarly debate flickers in here like moonlight through branches. Did medieval hunters see their work as noble sport, divine duty, or simple survival? Noble accounts, written by lords and bishops, called the hunt the mirror of manly virtue, filled with codes of honor and ritual. But common hunters, those who roamed deep forests alone, left no written words, only scars, tools, and legends. For them, the hunt was not glory but endurance, not ceremony but necessity. You can feel that difference now, in the hunter's steady breathing, in the dog's low growl as they follow the trail. He's not hunting for sport, he's chasing calories. They move downhill into a hollow where fog pools like spilled milk. The dog halts suddenly, ears pricked. The hunter freezes, one hand raised, and the world collapses into silence again. Then a flicker ahead, a shape moving slow, cautious, the faintest outline of antlers glistening with frost. The dog tenses, the hunter's breath stops. You feel it too. The timeless moment before action, when the universe holds still for one heartbeat. He draws his bow, not in haste but reverence, the string taut and creaking softly. The arrow waits like a thought unfinished. But something changes. The wind shifts, the doe lifts her head, her eyes catching the moonlight, and in that reflection, something human glimmers. Understanding, fear, or maybe just the shared fatigue of existing. The hunter exhales, lowers his bow. The dog whines softly, confused. The animal bounds away, vanishing into the fog without sound. He doesn't chase. He just stands there, bow in hand, watching the place where the deer disappeared. You can almost hear his thoughts, though he doesn't speak them. Maybe he remembers the dream, the one with the speaking deer. Maybe he's decided that the world owes him no kills tonight. Or maybe he's just tired of taking life for the same reason he fights to keep his own. The forest watches him without judgment. He lets out a long sigh, half surrender, half peace, and kneels to touch the snow again. The tracks will fade by dawn anyway. He turns back toward camp, the dog falling into step beside him. The moon is higher now, casting their shadows long across the snow. They look like ghosts returning home. One tall, one small, both tethered to a purpose older than words. The cold bites harder, but the hunter walks lighter, as if releasing something he didn't know he carried. You walk with him through the quiet, your own breath syncing with his, and realize how strange it feels to admire restraint more than triumph. Maybe that's what winter teaches best, that survival isn't about conquering everything around you, but knowing when to let it go. As they near the dim glow of the dying fire, the hunter glances back once more. The forest behind him gleams with moonlight, an ocean of silver waves frozen mid-motion. Somewhere far away the owl calls again, one long note fading into silence. He nods to it like a farewell, then steps into the small circle of warmth, his dog curling beside him instantly. The fire accepts him back like an old friend, sputtering a little in greeting. He feeds it a few dry twigs, then sits cross-legged, face to the moon. You realize you're watching someone who has made peace with hunger, with cold, with the unending repetition of it all. The wind stirs, lifting embers that spiral upward toward the silver sky. They rise like tiny shooting stars, vanishing one by one, and for a moment it's impossible to tell where the fire ends and the moon begins. The hunter smiles faintly, eyes half closed, and murmurs to his companion, "Another night done." The dog sighs, content. You breathe with them, the rhythm of survival slow and steady, and as the forest settles once more, you understand why they call it the Moonlight Trail. It isn't about following footprints, it's about learning to walk the line between darkness and peace, again and again, until morning finally forgives you. By the next evening, the forest has settled into its familiar rhythm, half wind, half silence, stitched together by the crunch of boots and the low murmur of breath. The hunter and his dog have returned to the same small clearing where their fire waits, a tiny red eye in an infinite expanse of white. The snow has thickened again, layering over every footprint from the night before, as if time itself insists on erasing the fact that they were ever here. He rebuilds the fire carefully, feeding it bits of bark and pine cones, coaxing it alive with the patience of someone who's learned that warmth never comes quickly. The dog curls near the base of the flame, eyes half shut, fur gleaming orange in the light. When he finally lowers himself beside her, his joints crack softly, like branches shifting under ice. Neither of them speaks, obviously, but the quiet between them feels crowded, full of understanding, shared exhaustion, and the kind of trust that doesn't need words. You realize as you watch them that this companionship, this silent breathing together, is what keeps men like him alive. Not bravery, not strength, but shared company in the unbearable cold. There's your mainstream historical fact. Medieval hunters and trappers often worked in pairs or trios, not simply for safety but for sanity. Chroniclers described cold brotherhoods, temporary partnerships formed in winter's worst months. These men ate, slept, and worked side by side, sometimes not exchanging a dozen words in a week, yet depending on one another more intimately than family. They learned each other's rhythms when one stirred the fire, when the other woke from a nightmare, when silence meant thought or despair. Many hunting guilds required pledges of mutual aid, ensuring no man froze alone. In practice, companionship was as vital as fire itself. Our hunter doesn't have another man this winter, only his dog. But even that counts. He watches her chest rise and fall, and something softens in his face. Maybe he's remembering the comrades of past winters, faces lost to snow, laughter swallowed by the years. He smiles faintly, shakes his head, and mutters something like, "You snore less than they did," earning himself a sleepy tail wag. He reaches out, resting a hand on her side, feeling the steady heartbeat beneath all that fur. The warmth surprises him every time, a quiet miracle that never grows dull. You can almost feel it too, the living heat pulsing through cold air, the simple reassurance of another creature existing beside you. Here's your quirky tidbit. Medieval folklore held that if two hunters shared a cloak or blanket for 7 consecutive nights, their luck became bound. Whatever fortune found one would follow the other for a year, good or ill. It's why some old hunting manuals advised alternating sleeping positions, lest the binding grow too strong. You can imagine the laughter that Rule provoked around old fires. men pretending superstition didn't comfort them while secretly believing it did. Our hunter clearly never read such warnings. He and the dog have shared warmth for weeks. If luck truly binds that way, they're a single creature now, stitched together by hunger and habit. The fire pops, throwing sparks into the night. He pokes at it absently, lost in thought. The dog shifts closer, pressing against his hip. You notice how naturally he leans into the contact as if without thinking. In a world where the cold wants to strip everything away, even the smallest touch feels sacred. You think about your own winters, radiators humming, blankets piled high, and realize that warmth is never just temperature, it's proximity, heartbeat, shared breath. The hunter's face is calm now, his eyelids heavy. He mutters a few words that sound like a prayer, though you suspect it's more habit than belief. Still, the intention is there. Gratitude whispered into the night, not for grand miracles but for this tiny flame and the company that guards it. The scholarly debate enters here like a shadow slipping between trees. Were medieval men lonely in the wilderness, or did solitude itself become a kind of companion? Some historians argue that the forest offered spiritual clarity, that men like this hunter sought isolation deliberately, finding God or peace in the stillness. Others insist that the loneliness was brutal, that silence drove men to superstition, drink, or madness. The truth likely lies somewhere in between. Watching him now, you can sense both sides. There's serenity in his stillness, but also fatigue so deep it borders on surrender. He's not chasing enlightenment, he's surviving it. The wind picks up, sweeping through the clearing with a low hum. Snow drifts sideways, hissing softly against the fire. The hunter pulls his fur cloak tighter and glances at his companion, who lifts her head briefly before tucking her nose back under her tail. He chuckles, quiet, low, almost a whisper. "Fine, you win," he murmurs, scooting closer until their shoulders touch. The gesture is half practical, half tender, the sort of small act that history rarely records but humanity always remembers. You imagine hundreds of nameless men like him across centuries doing the same, sharing jokes with animals, ghosts, or their own minds because laughter, however small, was warmth too. The fire burns lower, shadows stretching long and fluid. The hunter lies back, staring into the canopy where snowflakes drift down like tiny comets through a maze of branches. He watches them melt as they hit his sleeve. Tiny sparks gone in an instant. The dog's breathing deepens again, steady and slow. For a moment you can almost feel the weight of sleep pressing down on them both, the body's instinct to surrender after a day of motion and hunger. Yet even now his hand remains on his knife, fingers relaxed but ready. Companionship does not cancel caution, it simply makes it bearable. You realize that this scene so quiet, so ordinary, is the real heart of survival. Not the hunt, not the fire, not even the food. It's this, two living beings refusing to let the cold have them. Every heartbeat, every sigh, every shared breath is defiance. The hunter shifts once more, pulling his cloak to cover them both. The fire flickers, sending up its last embers, and the night folds around them like a slow closing hand. Somewhere deep in the forest, another owl calls, softer this time, like a lullaby that has learned discretion. You close your eyes too, letting the sound of their breathing replace your own. The chill of companionship, you realize, isn't something to fear. It's the ache that proves you're still human. The fire hums, the snow falls, and for one more fragile night, neither of them is alone. The morning after feels like a dream half remembered, mist still clinging to the trees, the air thick with the smell of burnt pine and the ghost of last night's laughter. The hunter stirs the ashes of his fire, watching the smoke twist upward in slow, deliberate spirals, gray turning gold where the light catches it. His dog lifts her head, blinks sleepily, and lets out a yawn so dramatic it looks like a silent howl. Together they sit in the hush of early light, neither speaking nor moving much, just existing in the warmth they've borrowed from the world. Then, faintly, The wind shifts, and with it comes a sound you almost don't notice at first. Voices. Not the sharp clatter of civilization, but low, stretched murmurs that could just as easily be the forest itself exhaling. The hunter straightens, head tilted. The dog growls softly, more out of habit than alarm. The voices rise and fall again. Not close, but not far, either. They seem to drift with the smoke, blending with it until you can't tell which is real and which is imagination. He smiles faintly, recognizing the trick. It's not men, it's the woods. In winter, sound travels strangely, bending around trees, echoing off frozen bark. Even the fire can whisper if you listen long enough. But still, he mutters a soft charm under his breath, a half-prayer taught to him long ago, something about keeping the whisperers of the wood at peace. You can hear the rhythm of the words, simple, steady, like the heartbeat of someone trying to believe in his own safety. There's your mainstream historical fact. In medieval Europe, forests weren't just geography, they were spiritual landscapes. Chroniclers and travelers alike described them as haunted or enchanted, places where faith and fear merged. Monks spoke of voices in the trees as pneuma silvorum, the breath of the woods believed to be echoes of saints, demons or souls of the unburied. Hunters, who spent more time in those shadows than anyone else, developed their own folklore to survive it. They spoke to the trees, named the winds, and left offerings of bread or bone at the roots of old oaks. It wasn't superstition so much as etiquette. The forest, after all, was their host, and good guests knew how to show respect. The hunter rises, brushing snow from his cloak. He tosses a pinch of ash into the air, watching it scatter and vanish. For the whisperers, he murmurs. The dog tilts her head, as though mildly unimpressed by human ritual. He chuckles and kneels to pack the ashes tighter, coaxing the fire back to life. The smoke thickens, rising in lazy ribbons that weave between the branches like the forest's own breath. He stares into it, and for a moment you swear you can see shapes forming. Faces, maybe, or just the illusion of them. A woman's profile, the curve of antlers, a figure cloaked in shadow. He blinks and they're gone, leaving only smoke and light. But the feeling lingers, the sense of being watched, not with malice but with memory. Here's your quirky tidbit. In some parts of Scandinavia and the Baltic, hunters used to believe that smoke carried stories to the spirits of the forest. They'd whisper into the flames before bed, recounting the day's events, kills, escapes, near misses, so that the wood would know their truth and forgive the blood spilled. A hunter who failed to share his tale risked bad luck, lost trails, or worse, a fire that refused to light the next day. You can picture our hunter doing the same now, his voice low and steady as he tells the smoke about the deer he spared, about the moonlight that showed mercy. The dog listens, head on paws, half asleep but alert in the way dogs always are. It's a strange kind of bedtime story, one told not for children but for the cold itself. The forest listens too. You can feel it in the quiet that follows his words, in the way the wind seems to soften. He feeds another branch to the fire, watching it catch, then adds a sliver of resin-soaked wood. The flame flares gold, and a familiar warmth creeps back into his fingers. The smell of wood smoke thickens, wrapping the clearing in its slow, sweet haze. You almost forget the cold watching him there, bent, weary, but completely at peace. For a moment he looks less like a man, and more like a part of the forest itself, a breathing extension of everything around him. The scholarly debate drifts in like fog. Did medieval people really believe the forest was alive, or was it simply poetic shorthand for fear of the unknown? Some scholars argue that the language of living woods was symbolic, a way to explain natural sounds before science. Others insist it was genuine animism, a worldview in which every rock and branch had agency. Either way, the effect was the same. Respect, reverence, restraint. When your shelter could whisper and your fire could listen, arrogance had no place in survival. You watch the hunter move with this same reverence, careful not to waste, not to trample, not to shout. He lives here not as a conqueror, but as a guest who never overstays. As dusk falls again, the voices seem to return. Faint laughter, a sigh like distant singing. The hunter doesn't startle this time. He just smiles, adding another log to the fire. The smoke curls upward again, and the whispers mingle with it until the air feels full of invisible conversation. Maybe it's the forest. Maybe it's memory. Maybe, as some scholars once suggested, the mind invents company when it's been too long alone. Whatever it is, it makes the night softer, the cold less cruel. He leans back, letting the wood smoke wash over him. The dog shifts closer, her tail thumping once in sleepy approval. He starts humming now. A low tune, something between a chant and a lullaby. You can't make out the melody, but it carries easily in the air, weaving through the smoke, blending with the whispers until it sounds like the whole forest is singing. The song fades slowly, replaced by the rhythmic pop of burning sap. The stars bloom above, the same cold audience they've always been. The hunter closes his eyes, face lit by flickering gold, and exhales. Around him, the world listens. The wind holds still. The dog dreams. The whispers soften, settling into the fire's rhythm until they sound like sleep itself. And as you sit there in your imagination, breathing in the smoke and in the hush, you realize something quietly profound. The forest was never talking to him. It was echoing him. His breath, his warmth, his voice reflected, magnified, returned. Whispers and wood smoke, the same fragile proof that even in the loneliest wilderness, you're never speaking entirely alone. Before the thaw, there comes that longest, most deceptive night. The one that feels like it will never end. The hunter wakes to it half-conscious, unsure whether hours or days have passed. His fire has gone out again, leaving only blackened wood and a few faintly glowing coals. The air is so still it hums. His breath doesn't rise anymore. It drifts sideways, curling lazily in the air before dissolving. Even his dog seems subdued, lying perfectly still, eyes half open as if conserving dreams. The forest is frozen mid-breath, its silence absolute, the world holding its posture like an animal pretending to be dead. This is the hour when even hope seems to have gone to sleep. The hunter rolls onto his back, staring into darkness so dense it might as well be solid, and for a moment he wonders if dawn has simply given up. He pushes himself upright, every joint aching, the weight of his furs suddenly unbearable. The dog stirs, yawns, and presses close to his side for reassurance that he doesn't entirely feel. He reaches for the pouch at his belt and finds it nearly empty. No food, no tinder, just a dull knife and a handful of frost-bitten faith. He chuckles softly, a dry sound that the cold eats before it can echo. "You and me, girl," he murmurs, "always the same story." His hand finds her head, warm beneath the fur, and she nuzzles against him as if to remind him that the story hasn't ended yet. There's your mainstream historical fact. Chroniclers of medieval winters often wrote about the false dawns of February, the pale light that would appear on the horizon for hours before the sun truly rose. It drove farmers and travelers mad, blurring time, tricking them into thinking the day had begun when it hadn't. Many believed it was the sun hesitating to return, needing to be coaxed by prayer or bells. Monasteries held early masses just to invite dawn back. In villages, people stepped outside to greet it, whispering charms like "Rise, old friend, rise." To live through a winter that long was to negotiate daily with the sky. You can imagine our hunter now, staring east and wondering if he's been forgotten by both gods and daylight. He rises slowly, brushing frost from his beard. His every movement sends tiny snow crystals scattering, glittering briefly before sinking back into the dark. He gathers a few pieces of frozen wood, strikes his flint again, and waits. The sparks fizzle uselessly, The bark is too wet, the air too cruel. For a moment, frustration flashes in his eyes. Then, like always, he exhales and starts again, slower, calmer. There's something holy in that repetition, the stubbornness of those who refuse to vanish quietly. When the flame finally catches, it's so faint it barely qualifies as light. Still, he shields it with his hands, coaxes it with whispers, feeding it bark, then twigs, then faith. The fire answers, first shy, then steady. The warmth reaches him in small waves, and his breath begins to sound like a prayer. Here's your quirky tidbit. In old alpine legend, when a fire refused to catch on a winter night, hunters would swear that frost spirits had stolen the flame's will. To fix it, they'd sprinkle a pinch of salt or wine into the embers as an offering. If the flame flared, it meant the spirits were appeased. If not, they packed up and moved on, believing the place cursed. You can see our hunter trying it now. He sprinkles a few grains of salt from his pouch, watches the fire spark brighter, and laughs under his breath. "Guess we're blessed again," he says to his dog, who looks unconvinced but relieved. The world around him doesn't brighten yet, but the blackness begins to thin. It's not light exactly, more like the color of waiting. The dog stretches, shakes snow from her coat, and sniffs the air. Somewhere beyond the trees, something shifts. Not danger, just movement. Maybe a hare, maybe the wind learning how to speak again. The hunter pokes the fire and sits back, wrapping his cloak tighter. He's not looking for dawn anymore. He's learning to live in the in-between. You can almost feel his heartbeat slowing to match the forest's rhythm. The dog rests her head on his knee, and together they watch the nothingness turn, ever so slowly, into something like morning. The scholarly debate flickers here like the weak flame before you. Did medieval people truly despair in the long dark, or did they see beauty in endurance? Some letters from 14th century monks describe winter nights as divine stillness, while peasant diaries speak of them as endless dread. Both might be true. The difference is perspective. The hunter embodies both, wariness and wonder, cynicism and awe. His world is merciless, but it's also magnificent. Even when the light refuses to return, he keeps preparing for it, as if faith itself could bend the horizon. And then, after what feels like hours or years, the faintest streak of silver appears between the trees. It's not much, just a thread of brightness woven into the dark. The hunter sees it and smiles, slow and tired. "There you are," he whispers. His dog lifts her head too, ears twitching at the first birdsong in days. It's weak, hesitant, like a child remembering a tune. Still, it's music, the kind that doesn't need perfection to be miraculous. He stands, stretches, and faces the east, letting the light, thin and cold though it is, touch his face. It stings, but it's a welcome pain, proof that the world hasn't ended. Around him, the forest begins to shift colors, gray to blue, blue to pale gold. The frost on the trees gleams. The air moves. The first true dawn in weeks finally climbs the horizon, cautious but unstoppable. The hunter laughs again, a sound that belongs to no one but him, echoing softly through the woods like the crack of thawing ice. You feel it too. The relief that's not joy exactly, but something quieter, deeper. The kind that comes after surviving something that didn't care whether you did. The fire burns brighter now, no longer timid but proud, as if it too recognizes victory. The hunter kneels beside it, feeding it his last piece of wood, not because he needs to, but because it deserves it. He glances at his dog, grins, and says simply, "We held the line." And that's the truth of it. The dawn doesn't always rush in like a promise. Sometimes it crawls, pale and shaking, testing your patience until you forget what color feels like. But when it comes, it's not just the world that warms, it's you. The hunter breathes it in, lets it fill his lungs, and for the first time in this long, endless winter, the light feels personal. The sky turns gold. The dog barks once in celebration, and everything, absolutely everything, begins again. When morning finally arrives, it doesn't burst, it seeps. Light drips slowly through the branches, washing the world in the faintest suggestion of gold. The snow no longer crackles beneath the hunter's boots, it sighs, soft and heavy, surrendering to warmth. The air tastes different now, less like steel, more like memory. You can almost smell the thaw coming, that mingling of sap, soil and smoke that announces winter's retreat before the trees dare believe it. The hunter stirs from his blanket of furs, blinking against the pale dawn. The dog is already awake, watching him with eyes that gleam like amber coins. She stretches, yawns, and pads toward the fire pit, sniffing the ash as if to confirm that last night's light was real and not another dream. He chuckles, slow and soft, rubbing his hands together until friction brings a ghost of heat. Another day, another breath. Somehow, that's enough. He crouches, strikes flint, and within moments the flame answers. It burns faster today, the wood drier, the air kinder. You can hear it too, the sound of thaw in motion. Water dripping from branches, snow slipping from ledges, the rhythmic plop of melting ice hitting the ground like a heartbeat returning after a long sleep. The forest feels looser now, its grip on life relaxing. Even the wind has changed. It no longer bites. It brushes. The hunter tilts his head upward, letting sunlight graze his face, and exhales the kind of sigh that only comes from surviving something that wanted to erase you. There's your mainstream historical fact. As medieval winters waned, hunters and herdsmen celebrated the breaking of the white silence, a phrase found in early 15th century almanacs and oral accounts across northern Europe. The first melt wasn't just meteorology, it was renewal. Villagers lit small fires on hilltops to call back the soil. Women hung herbs in doorways to bless returning warmth, and hunters left offerings of bone or hide in forest shrines to thank the spirits for sparing them. In a world balanced between faith and frost, even the shift of temperature was treated as sacred theater. The hunter before you seems to feel that holiness too. He kneels beside his fire, murmuring something that sounds less like prayer and more like gratitude spoken through tired lungs. The dog sits beside him, tail sweeping faint lines into the melting snow. He reaches down, scratches behind her ear, and grins. "We made it," he says aloud, and for once his voice doesn't echo. It melts into the air, absorbed by a world that has stopped holding its breath. He rummages through his pack, finds the last of his dried bread, and breaks it in two. One piece for himself, one for her. She takes it gently, crumbs clinging to her whiskers. Together they eat in the quiet dawn, the simplicity of it more nourishing than any feast. Here's your quirky tidbit. In some medieval mountain regions, hunters swore that the first food eaten on the day of the thaw carried luck for the whole year. If you shared it, human or beast, the luck doubled. If you wasted it, storms would return. Some even believed that the snow itself listened, holding grudges against those who bragged too loudly about surviving it. So hunters ate modestly, silently, letting the forest witness humility rather than hubris. Our hunter seems to follow that rule instinctively. He eats slowly, eyes on the horizon where the sky turns honey pink. When he's finished, he wipes his mouth with the back of his glove, then leans back, hands behind his head, and just watches. The forest is alive again. You can hear the drip of meltwater gathering in tiny streams running beneath the snow like veins under skin. Somewhere distant, a woodpecker hammers a heartbeat, steady and insistent. Even the dog feels it, nose twitching at the new scents rising from the ground. Damp earth, pine resin, maybe even the faint musk of something living that isn't hungry for once. The hunter laughs under his breath, the sound carrying no bitterness this time. Spring's got its fingers in the hinges, he mutters as though the whole forest is a great frozen door finally creaking open. The scholarly debate hums quietly in the background. How did medieval people truly perceive winter's end? Was it triumph or relief or both? Some texts paint it as victory, man outlasting nature. Others describe it more humbly, nature relenting, choosing to forgive. The difference is subtle but profound. Watching the hunter now, you know which side he stands on. He doesn't see himself as conqueror, but as guest allowed to stay a little longer. His smile isn't pride, it's thankfulness disguised as fatigue. He rises, shoulders his pack, and looks around the clearing one last time. The fire still burns, steady and golden, a defiant echo of all the others that didn't survive the storm. He lets it burn itself out naturally. No need to snuff it now. The forest can have the warmth back. His dog circles once, then falls into step beside him as they begin the slow walk down the slope toward the valley. Each step sinks softly into slush, and where their boots and paws land, dark soil peeks through the first true color in months. Behind them their tracks fill slowly with meltwater, fading even as they move forward. The sun climbs higher, shafts of light pierce the trees, scattering diamonds across the snowmelt. Steam rises in thin veils, and for the first time you can smell life, real, undeniable life rising from the thaw. The hunter stops at a small ridge, looks back at the endless white behind him, and nods once, not in farewell exactly, but in acknowledgement. The forest gave him its cold, and in return he gave it his endurance. It's an even trade. He turns again, facing the slope ahead, where the snow grows thinner and the sound of running water hums like music. You breathe with him now. Slower, steadier. The pace of the story softens, every sentence stretching like sunlight over frost. His dog barks once, bright and brief, and he laughs. They walk in silence for a while, listening to the crunch of wet ground, the trickle of thawing creeks, the faraway chatter of returning birds. The world feels wider again, no longer a trap but an open palm. For the first time in what feels like centuries, he doesn't count steps or hours, just breaths. As they disappear deeper into the brightening forest, the scene fades gently. The fire behind them collapses into smoke, then nothing. The snow glows softer, the light grows warmer, and the sound of dripping becomes a lullaby. You close your eyes and let the rhythm slow even further, until all that's left is warmth, the imagined kind but no less real. And as your breathing evens out, you hear it, the final whisper of the forest, not in words but in feeling. You made it through the cold. Your mind drifts, your pulse quiets, and the narrative dissolves into stillness. The hunter keeps walking, the dog by his side, both shrinking into the distance until they're just two moving sparks in a world reborn. The forest sighs one last time, a sound like relief and blessing combined, and the scene dims to gold, then gray, then nothing at all. End of script. Sweet dreams.